The morning following that anxious night by the old locomotive brought a sense of calm to the group, largely because Senator, having voluntarily taken the watch for the entire night, hadn't woken a soul until dawn. Breaking camp was swift, and the trio moved toward the territory border, demonstrating an impressive, growing cohesion. Mark, guided by his detector and the silent, shamanic cues of Senator, disarmed invisible springboard anomalies, while Auric, swelling with pride at his role in the expedition, managed to spot and shoot a boar in the undergrowth. However, at the boom barrier itself, an unpleasant surprise awaited the stalkers. The passage was blocked by three unknown figures in heavy mercenary suits and gas masks, armed to the teeth with serious hardware: a sniper rifle, an OC-14 Groza assault complex, and a SPAS-12 shotgun. Assessing the hopelessness of a frontal attack, Mark made a grim joke about performing the chicken dance, at which point the central mercenary began to clown around before tearing off his mask to reveal a Borland. The sniper introduced his reinforcements: an aristocratic-looking marksman with the call sign S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and a good-natured giant heavily laden with weaponry named Patron. Borland accepted the unarmed senator into the group without question, then proceeded to distribute the promised gear. Mark received an elegant German G36 rifle. Borland unceremoniously tossed Auric's old automatic into the bushes, handing the lad a brand new Kalashnikov, leaving him unspeakably delighted. Senator, declaring himself a pacifist, refused firearms entirely and took his place in the center of the formation. The six-man group, moving in a column with Borland on point and S.T.A.L.K.E.R bringing up the rear, set out through the western part of the garbage toward the Agroprom Research Institute. They passed the radioactive lake with its grave cross, where Borland had once escaped pursuit by dissolving his own suit in acid, and skirted the legendary bird whirligig anomaly, known for grinding all living things to paste. Upon reaching the Institute grounds, the stalkers grew wary of the unnatural silence. Their premonition did not deceive them. A sniper's bullet zipped right past Borland's ear, striking a dumpster with a sharp clang. The group instantly scattered and took cover, only to find themselves in a crossfire. Shots were coming not only from the building, but also from the rear near the checkpoint. Borland and Mark suppressed the shooter at the gate with return fire, while S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Patron, and Auric opened chaotic fire on the Institute's windows. To break the deadlock, Borland made a daring run. Zigzagging wildly, he burst into the lobby, flew up the stairs to the top floor, and climbed through a hatch onto the roof. There, finding the unsuspecting sniper, he shouted his nonsensical battle cry, "Kaja Baja!" and gunned the enemy down at point-blank range with his Groza, kicking the body onto the asphalt at his comrade's feet. Searching the corpses, the stalkers found the military IDs of a sergeant and a private. Borland explained that they had run into deserters, outlaws who fired at anything that moved. Mark attempted to find justification for the dead, suggesting they were simply trying to survive or scare the group off, but Borland sharply cut these thoughts short, reminding him that the military men had fired first and without warning. Having settled the moral side of the matter, Borland led the group to an inconspicuous spot behind a dumpster where a hole gaped in the asphalt. He announced that this was the entrance to Laboratory X17.
Dropping through the hole in the asphalt,
The group landed in a gloomy corridor cluttered with wires and machinery. Here, the first crack in their unity appeared. Borland, the last to descend, handed the reins of command over to Mark, admitting that he had never gone further than this entrance and had only ever used it as a latrine. Irritated by the mercenaries' mockery and feeling his authority crumbling, Mark reacted silently and violently. He struck Borland full force in the face, slamming the sniper's head back against the iron rungs of the ladder. Borland, appreciating the weight of the blow but unwilling to yield in spirit, engaged in a verbal duel. It ended with Mark grimly cementing his leadership, while the sniper agreed to follow orders, albeit with unconcealed irony. Pushing deeper into the corridor, the stalkers stumbled upon a mangled iron bench. Senator, examining the wreckage, concluded it had been struck by the monstrous limb of an Islam, a fracture, a dangerous mutant. His guess was confirmed at the spiral staircase, where they found a fresh trail of blood. Senator deduced that the Islam, spooked by the firefight on the surface, had dragged one of the deserters down here mere minutes ago, inadvertently saving the group from an ambush. Bypassing a witch's jelly anomaly, the squad descended into a massive circular hall. In its center stood a locked, armored chamber protected by an electro-anomaly, which Mark discharged with a well-placed bolt. While the stalkers searched for documents, Mark surreptitiously checked his black crystal. The object had begun to pulsate in this location. After finding the required report, Mark watched as Borland, unwilling to leave empty-handed, swept every other scrap of paper into his own backpack. Suddenly, a rhythmic knocking echoed from the locked chamber, an SOS signal. Despite Borland's protests, Mark turned the heavy valve wheel and opened the massive door, releasing a strange, pale stalker named Elf. He explained that he had hidden here from the military, only to be trapped by the Islam, which had been unable to open the door to eat him. Hardly had Elf finished his story when a fast-moving shadow darted under the hall's dome. The Islam, capable of levitating by vaulting on its hypertrophied limb, attacked the group from above. Bullets failed to track the high-speed target until Borland commanded, "Fan fire!" and fired his underbarrel grenade launcher, blasting the monster to the floor. However, the beast proved even more dangerous on the ground. A sweep of its giant arm knocked Senator aside, slapped the weapon from Borland's hands, and sent Teknar flying into a knockout, his body armor barely absorbing the impact. Patron was also tossed aside. In a desperate attempt to delay the enemy, Orek jumped onto the Islam's arm and was hoisted up toward the ceiling, where the monster began to spin him around for a lethal throw. In this critical moment, Mark drew the black crystal. Squeezing it, he summoned an icy wind and crackling blue lightning. He rose into the air and conjured a powerful gravitational anomaly, a concentrated sphere of force. The gravity concentrate intercepted the falling Orek, lowering him gently to the floor while simultaneously twisting the Islam's arm. With a sickening crunch, the anomaly ripped the limb from the body before vanishing, leaving a wrenched artifact on the chest of the rescued rookie. Borland finished off the agonizing, armless monster with a shot to the head. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the groans of the recovering mercenaries, the sniper sat on a table. With trembling hands, he took a swig from his alcohol flask, attempting to diffuse the tension with a joke. The chamber door creaked open once more, and a terrified elf, who had missed the entire battle, peeked out. Climbing out of the hole in the asphalt under the open sky, a terrified elf who had been hiding in the chamber the entire time began to beg the others not to abandon him. Borland, after ensuring the perimeter was clear, allowed the tourist to join the group, assigning Patron to keep an eye on him and to shoot him if he did anything stupid. The stalkers passed the checkpoint, where Elf nearly fainted at the sight of the dead deserter, and finally left the territory of the Agroprom Research Institute, exhaled sharply, relishing the fresh air. Along the way, Orek questioned Senator about the nature of the force that had torn the monster apart in the dungeon. The philosopher explained that it was a collision between a newborn gravity concentrate and the anomaly within the Islam's arm, which had birthed a wrenched artifact. To test Elf's nerve and put an end to his chatter, Borland suddenly stopped and ordered the rookie to spray fire into a suspicious bush. Elf obeyed, and a boar rushed out with a squeal. The frightened lad immediately riddled it with lead, earning scant praise from the point man. The group continued toward the garbage, intending to head straight for the dark valley. However, on the approach to the railway embankment, Borland ordered everyone to hit the dirt. The road was blocked by a massive military raid involving elite Spetsnaz and APCs. Realizing they were hemmed in and that a firefight would be suicide, Mark proposed an insane alternative, taking the old railway tunnel that led to the hangar. Borland was categorically against it, calling the place a death trap, but since the only alternatives were capture or execution by the military, he was forced to agree, following the determined Mark. The stalkers slipped unnoticed past the cordon posts and into the dark maw of the tunnel. Inside, a grave-like cold reigned, accompanied by a ghastly whistling sound. From the ceiling hung a severed, dead hand that twitched a finger, pointing the way for the departing humans. The path was barred by a complex cluster of anomalies. Mark took the lead, charting a course with bolts and acrobatic leaps between electros and burners, narrowly avoiding a gravity concentrate. The others followed in his footsteps, trace for trace. Further in, the tunnel presented new surprises. The rails rose all the way to the ceiling due to strange moss-like green growths on the floor, forcing the group to strip off their gear and squeeze through a narrow crack beneath the vault. Then came a piece of mad engineering. Rails crisscrossed in a chaotic web before ending at a giant electro that blocked the entire floor. Elf saved the day by producing Velcro from his backpack, artifact-infused gloves and knee pads that allowed one to crawl on walls. The group climbed onto the ceiling, only to discover that below, where the floor should have been, a bottomless abyss had opened. Mark nearly plummeted into the void, but Borland, hanging upside down by his legs alone, managed to catch him and heave him onto the solid surface of the sleepers. Hardly had they caught their breath when a wave of Tushkanos, mutated rodents, surged toward them. They managed to repel the swarm with a grenade, but immediately after, an invisible bloodsucker attacked. In a furious melee, Patron wounded the monster, rendering it visible. Mark shot off its tentacles, and Borland finished the beast. But the true horrors lay ahead. The tunnel warped, looping in impossible ways. The flashlights died, and figures emerged from the darkness, semi-decayed skeletons. After a shootout with the Walking Dead, hallucinations began. Borland saw a disfigured doppelganger of himself offering him a chocolate bar. Tek.N.A.R fell into a stupor, and a phantom train roared past, from which Orek managed to shoot off a very real iron wheel. The psyche of the giant patron finally snapped. He began chanting that he was big and shouldn't be afraid, then walked off into the darkness, unresponsive to his friend's shouts. Rushing after him, the group reached a three-way fork where they encountered the ghost of a teenage girl in 1980s clothing. She chattered cheerfully, flirted with Borland, asked them not to tell her mother, and mentioned that today was April 26th, the day of the Chernobyl disaster. Pointing out the safe path, she vanished. Borland bitterly noted that she had been dead for a quarter of a century. Following the indicated tunnel, the stalkers found Patron holding a makeshift torch. He had come to his senses but remembered nothing of his breakdown. Finally emerging into the garbage, the exhausted group discovered that an entire day had passed while they were underground. It was evening, and they had been forever changed by what they had seen. At sunset, in the railway hangar where the Stalkers had taken shelter after the horrors of the tunnel, Borland passed his flask around, allowing everyone a sip of alcohol. The sniper outlined their grim situation. The path south was blocked by the military raid, and heading north to the 100 Rads bar was impossible. Duty had almost certainly begun a purge following the assassination of the Marauder leader, Lavash, meaning any suspicious stalker risked imprisonment. The only viable option was to head for the Dark Valley immediately, without wasting a second, before the enemy could seal the entrances. Borland tried to drive away Elf, who had tagged along, advising him to head north. However, the blonde refused to leave, claiming he knew the exact location of Laboratory X17, even though he hadn't descended into it himself. Desperate for intel, the group agreed to keep him. After a brief sleep, the squad moved out into the darkness. On the approach to the valley, Borland's instruments detected anomalies, but Senator saved the situation. The philosopher unexpectedly announced that he could see perfectly in the dark, and guided the group through the hazardous sector without the need for detectors. Reaching an industrial zone that resembled an old farmstead, Elf led the Stalkers to a building equipped with a tower crane. Inside, amidst rusted pipes, he pointed to a staircase leading to a basement and a hermetic door. However, he refused to descend, remaining upstairs to stand guard. Although Borland sensed something was wrong, he led the group down. At the end of a narrow corridor, they found a massive door secured by 5 electronic locks. S.T.A.L.K.E.R connected his PDA and a special magnetic device to the panel, beginning the hack. When 3 locks were bypassed, shots, screams, and heavy footsteps echoed from above. Harsh electric lights suddenly flooded the corridor. The trap had snapped shut. Elf vanished, and marauders began pouring down the stairs. Borland and Mark opened fire, eliminating the first wave of attackers, while S.T.A.L.K.E.R feverishly cracked the final security codes. The door finally yielded, but the hydraulic automation resisted, trying to seal it shut again. S.T.A.L.K.E.R shouted for everyone to get inside. Orek slipped through first, followed by Mark and Senator. Patron barged in next and threw his massive weight against the door from the inside, straining to keep the passage open. Borland and S.T.A.L.K.E.R remained in the corridor to cover the retreat, but a grenade tumbled down from above. Borland hurled his Groza rifle at the projectile, batting it slightly further away, and threw himself over S.T.A.L.K.E.R. The explosion stunned both men, but did not kill them. Realizing the battle was lost, and they were about to be riddled with lead from under-barrel launchers, Borland drew his pistol and shot the electronic lock mechanism. The system failed, and the door slammed shut, cutting off Mark, Senator, Orek, and Patron inside the laboratory, and thereby saving them from the massacre. The concussed Borland and S.T.A.L.K.E.R were disarmed and taken prisoner. Borland tried to mock the assault group leader, nicknamed Pinzette, Tweezers, by introducing himself as Sonya Piglet, but the bandit simply ordered him taken upstairs. As Borland was dragged up the stairs with a bag over his head, a single shot rang out below. The marauders had executed S.T.A.L.K.E.R. The prisoner was hauled into an unfinished brick building and seated before a man in a green trench coat, flanked by a grim Arab in a turban named Saeed. The man in the coat introduced himself as Kapkan, Trap. He revealed that Lavash, the man Borland had assassinated, was his brother. Kapkan laid out the entire scheme. No one from duty had betrayed Borland. The traitor was Elf. The blonde was a bandit informant who had deliberately lured the group into the trap, knowing exactly who had killed the Marauder leader. Now, Mark's team was walled up in the laboratory with cutthroats guarding the exit, while Borland faced a public execution in 1 hour. The Stalker was dragged to the basement and thrown into a cramped cage. Staring through a narrow window at the moon and listening to the howling of dogs, he sank to the floor in powerless defeat. The door slammed shut with finality, cutting the group off from the corridor and the marauders. Even the mighty Patron could not budge it, as Borland's shot had destroyed the locking mechanism. Trapped, the Stalkers realized there was no turning back. Mark, assuming command, decided not to succumb to panic, but to proceed with the mission, finding the documents, and worry about the exit later. Patron, burdened by guilt over his breakdown in the tunnel, apologized to his comrades and pledged to protect them to the bitter end. Looking around, the group found the laboratory surprisingly well preserved. White tiling, functional lighting, and sterile cleanliness. They located an elevator shaft, which was predictably dead, and began their descent on foot. On the lower level, the atmosphere shifted. Debris lay everywhere, and crates were scattered about. Senator explained that a poltergeist, a being capable of existing as both flesh and energy, held sway here. Confirming his words, heavy stomping echoed from above, and plaster dusted down from the ceiling. The invisible host was making its presence known. Descending even deeper, the Stalkers hit a coded door. Mark arbitrarily entered the date of the Chernobyl disaster. The lock beeped an error, yet the door suddenly slid open on its own. Beyond the threshold hung a violet cluster of energy, surrounded by rotating spheres. It was an aggressive poltergeist, which attacked immediately. Weapons in human hands shuddered, trying to tear themselves free, while rifle straps began to strangle their owners. Suddenly, a second cluster, orange in color, shot up from below and attacked its violet brethren with a "ah!" shriek. Senator instantly grasped the situation and ordered the group to fire on the violet orb, aiding the orange one. Through their united efforts, the hostile poltergeist was destroyed. It exploded, briefly taking the form of a grotesque humanoid before vanishing. The surviving orange orb behaved peaceably. Senator gently beckoned it, christened it Applesson, orange, and offered it a chocolate bar. The poltergeist absorbed the food, converting matter into energy, and bounced joyfully like a ball. While Orek marveled that monsters could wage war on one another, the group pressed on. On the lower technical level, amidst the maze of pipes and boilers, Orek nearly met his end. He leaned too close to a wall and activated a fireball anomaly. Patron managed to shove the lad away a split second before the discharge of flame. In gratitude, Orek immediately gifted his savior an artifact he had snatched from the anomaly and promised him a crate of beer. Mark, meanwhile, was behaving erratically. Instead of searching for papers, he wandered the hall, touching various objects and muttering the names of materials: steel, glass, brass, titanium. Finally, in a cubicle containing a computer, he found a dusty journal. Touching the copper spiral of the binding, he felt heat radiating from the black crystal in his pocket and declared he had found the objective without even opening the notebook. When the Stalkers prepared to leave, their path upward was blocked by a massive pseudo-giant wedged into the stairwell. The awakened monster opened a singular eye and attacked furiously, impervious to bullets. It managed to snag Mark's leg with a claw, but Applesson once again came to the rescue. The orange poltergeist began battering the stairwell span above the beast, collapsing a heavy concrete structure directly onto the pseudo-giant, crushing it into pulp. Patron yanked Mark out from under the debris at the last second. The stairs were destroyed, but Applesson forced the elevator doors open, inviting the humans inside. Despite Orek's fear that it was a trap, the Stalkers entered the cab, and the poltergeist used its telekinetic energy to lift the elevator to the top floor, delivering them back to the very sealed door behind which the marauders waited. Before parting, the stalkers fed Applesson chocolate once more. A smiling face rippled across the orb's surface before it flew away. Now stuck in a dead end before the blocked exit, Mark was at a loss. But Senator smiled slyly, looked at the door, and advised them to get the chocolate ready, implying he knew a way out.